Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing a report for the first initial inroads of Uranus' movement into Taurus, which is from the 15th of May up until the 6th of November, when Uranus will make one final backtrack into Aries before moving on fully into Taurus in February of next year. So before I go through the actual explanation of this, I just want to clarify, as I always do, that astrology doesn't control us in any way, shape or form. It's a map of what the energies around us are doing, so we can understand what general themes are outlining, what direction all the energies are going in, and how we can best align ourselves with it, so that we're now going with the flow rather than trying to fight against it. Now, Uranus in Taurus, this is our first taste of it since Uranus left Taurus back in 1942. So most of us have never really experienced this particular combination before. But whatever sign Uranus touches, that sign then has to go through some kind of revolution or transformation. It's being willing to embrace change in that particular area, to figure out where do we need to elevate the level of consciousness that sign's going through, and how do we need to transform it so that particular sign is operating in a more collective and humanitarian way rather than at a personal and selfish level. So with Uranus in Taurus, the main area that needs to go through transformation and a revolution as such is our value system, because there's all the choices that we make in life and the actions that we then take in response to that choice are ultimately derived from what values we hold. So if we have a very materialistic value system, then we will always choose to engage in materialist pursuits, or to try and gain or gather to us as many material resources and material luxuries as we can, in the hopes that it generates that feeling of security. But if the value system is more spiritual, on the other hand, then we're more likely to engage in spiritual pursuits, or our actions are going to be guided by our spiritual practice rather than egoic drives and things like this. But we have to undergo this kind of transformation willingly. Taurus is also fixed Earth. It's a very strong connection with the Earth around us, and part of Taurus is getting grounded. It's about connecting with the energies of the Earth around us. It's about developing or cultivating that sense of self-sufficiency, where we have the capability, or we know how we can manifest the resources that we need in order to keep us going, and that will keep any given goal or project we're working on going forwards until, of course, we no longer need that resource, at which point we need to then let go of it so someone else can use it. So during Uranus' initial transit in Taurus, before it's backtracked later in the year, this gives us a taste of what this is all going to mean for us. So part of the things we need to look at is, where do we need to get more connected with nature? Where do we need to develop our resources in a more ecological way, in a more sustainable way? How do we learn to gain things through working with the natural cycles rather than fighting against them and resisting them? And where do we learn to, instead of constantly extracting fresh resources from the earth, which is getting consistently depleted, how can we recycle or reuse the resources we already have? How can we become more creative and more resourceful? And how can we use the resources that we already have in a more humanitarian way? So because Uranus is ultimately about opening our minds up and helping us understand that we're connected with everything around us. We're connected with one another, we're connected with the environment. So any action or any choice that we make ultimately has a direct impact on this. So Uranus is, in effect, helps us connect with the third eye. If you someone who follows the chakra system, it's the point of awareness that helps us understand that everything is connected, nothing is truly separate. Separation is operates at the level of the ego, but at the higher self level, we need to look at how we're interconnected and understand that whatever choices we make has the potential to impact other people and vice versa. And so far, we look at the things that we typically have around us, like all the plastics and things like this. We've been operating so far in the assumption it's unlimited, yet we know that it's ultimately a finite resource, and we're now experiencing the negative effects of willfully extracting things without considering the consequences of it. So with Uranus' passage through Taurus, we now need to be looking within our own personal lives, how can we work more in line with how natural cycles operate, and how can we give Mother Nature a helping hand in terms of healing the environment, fixing it. There are plenty of cases around the world that demonstrate people who've already doing this. So, for example, there's a ranch in Texas, that's, a guy named it Sealer, but he took the worst piece of land and he regenerated it by restoring the environment through natural means, through planting grasses so that water could permeate into the soil, streams and rivers were reborn as a result, and the area became lush and fertile again. So we need to look at how can we don't necessarily have to do grand gestures or anything like this, but how can we be more environmentally conscious? How can we be more aware of how we use our resources, and how can we become more creative and more efficient with it? How can we look at the resources that we already have in a new way and create more sustainable solutions to situations, rather than going to down the old roads that we've followed so far? There's also looking at some more traditional ways we've done things. So in the past, if an item broke down, we repaired it, whereas now if an item breaks, we generally just throw it away and buy a new one. So how can we look to repair the resources that we already have? How can we become more sustainable and more self-sufficient by learning to work with the resources that we already have and learn to repair things rather than just getting rid of them because they're not working, and instead look at how can we learn how something works or how it's made, and how can we then figure out how to fix things for ourselves, and also how can we share the resources that we have? How can we develop our own personal resources, our own personal skills and gifts, and how we can then use them with other people to achieve collective projects through cooperation and working with the natural cycles that tap into that energy of synergy, where the collective energy is brought together by people working willingly together in community, achieves results far more powerful than can be achieved by one person alone. How can we share our resources and bring them together or pool them in a communal effort to achieve bigger goals, but in a more sustainable way? Because it's not one person having to get all the resources in order to get something. If we all learn to share what we already have, then many of the things could be done with far fewer resources, because if someone's already got the tool and prepared to lend various resources to one another and various tools, then the same thing or same projects can be completed with far less resources and in a much more sustainable kind of way. So Uranus in Taurus asks us all to see where the way things are going at the moment are unsustainable. How can we learn to understand the natural cycle of things and sync up with them so that we then go with the natural flow of the energies rather than trying to fight against them? Where do we need to break through that internal resistance to change, that stubbornness and that laziness? And how can we learn to trust that what we need will be provided in one way or another? It may not be in the way we would normally expect it to, but if we have the faith that the resources that we need will be provided, and also have the belief in ourselves that we have the capacity to create what we need already, we just haven't learned how to do it yet. But by working together and developing our own resources and becoming more sustainable in how we do things, then we can do things in a much less much less damaging kind of way. We can work with the natural environment, and if we understand how the natural cycles work, we can then figure out how can we give Mother Nature a helping hand, how can we fix some of the environmental damage that's been inflicted by us, not by coming up with new man-made solutions, just giving Mother Nature a helping hand. So if we know that the water source needs to be replenished by planting more grass, then we plant more grass. If a forest is being cut down, we replant it rather than waiting for nature to try and do it. There's various examples around the world, like the Green Wall across Africa, this wall being a wall of planted trees to encourage water to return and for the ground to become fertile again. There are cases around the world where this is already going on. Uranus in Taurus just is a time where we all need to get on board, and we all need to look at how can we do things in a more sustainable way, how can we become more self-sufficient and self-reliant, so we're not relying on other people to do the work for us, and we're not being lazy, we're doing the necessary work. And how can we learn to develop the faith that what we need will always be provided. We may not get what we want, but we'll get what we need. And how can we focus on making sure that we do our earthly tasks, we do the things we need to do every single day to keep ourselves fed, to maintain our current circumstances, and to develop greater resources, to develop more self-sufficiency. But how can we also learn to focus on spiritual devotion as well, so that we're not trying to control everything, we're not trying to worry about how can we make ends meet or things like this. If we can learn to trust that there's a higher power guiding everything, but for us to link with that higher power we also need to be connected with the earth, so it's as above so below. If we're working in this way that's sustainable, that we revolutionise our value system, so we look at things in a more ecological and sustainable way, rather than trying to get all the fancy gadgets we can in life and never feeling satisfied because there's always going to be some new coming out later on. If we can learn to do more with less, as it were, to learn how to fix things rather than constantly buying something new, and to learn to share the resources that we already have so we achieve a greater collective goal. This doesn't mean that we lose track of who we are. It doesn't mean that we give ourselves over to a large group, etc., or anything like this. It's important that we honour who we are and we stay true to who we are. We also need to recognise that the way things have been going are causing far too much damage to the environment. But if we can work with the natural environment instead, work with the natural cycles, then we'll be a lot less stressed, we'll be a lot more resourceful and more self-sufficient. And this then means that we're less likely to worry about scarcity. If we learn to share everything, to help one another, then we create abundance in a more sustainable way, rather than trying to go for rampant abundance but of things that we don't actually need. Because Taurus at its best is about simplicity. It's about the simple things in life, the simple pleasures, the fact we don't need everything to be complicated, we don't need everything to require multiple complex systems to work. The natural cycles of things are simple in their own kind of way. They just naturally emerge, and if we can learn to simplify and work in a more sustainable way, then we stand a chance of restoring the environment, of healing it, and making things clean again, so that humanity does stand a chance to survive in the long run. Because otherwise, if we carry on going at the same rate we've been doing, then we're just going to bring our own demise about, because we're destroying the very things needed to sustain life. If we work with life, however, then we can manifest everything that we need and more, and there'll be more than enough to go around. So it's a rather long video, but I hope it's a useful guide for Uranus. As I said, this is just a taster. Uranus doesn't force anything upon us, but if we want things to go smooth, if we want to make the best of this transit, we need to look at how can we become more ecologically sustainable, and how can we learn to share our resources rather than trying to get everything for the self at the expense of other people and at the expense of the environment. So may Uranus in Taurus and its first taster for us, because this is just the taster of the main transit that's going to start next year, but may learn a lot from this initial taster, so that when the actual transit proper starts, we're already in a good strong place to make the best use of of the energies available, and to empower ourselves through transforming our values and becoming more sustainable in how we do things. So take care, be blessed.